Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're diving into a topic you probably think you know, Bushido. But what if I told you we're going to look at it from a completely different angle? Not as a code for warriors, but as a spiritual guide for the soul.
When you hear the word Bushido, I'm guessing your mind jumps straight to samurai warriors, right? Katanas, a strict code of honor, all of that. And yeah, that's definitely the popular image. But the teachings we're exploring today say the real battle isn't out there on some field, it's in here. We're going way deeper to uncover a spiritual meaning that's all about the battle within ourselves.
So, our guide on this journey comes from these incredible spiritual teachings attributed to a divine spirit named Ame-no-Mioya-Gami. They frame Bushido as this really profound philosophy for life. So, think of this less as a history lesson and more of a spiritual deep dive.
All right, here's our game plan. First, we're going to totally redefine what true Bushido even is. Then, we'll get into the core idea of the soul, who you really are. After that, we'll unpack this fascinating paradox between being selfless and having huge ambitions. We'll discover the true purpose of fighting, and finally, we'll bring it all home and see how these ancient ideas can actually apply to our lives today. Okay, let's jump right in. Part 1. What is true Bushido? Well, the answer might not be what you expect. It's all about one thing, the battle against worldly attachment.
At its absolute heart, this kind of Bushido is like a rescue mission for your soul. The central idea is that while we're living on Earth, we get tangled up in all these desires, right? The hunger for money, for approval, just this attachment to our physical bodies. This path is designed to cut those cords, to stop our souls from getting trapped here, so that one day we can return to our true home in the celestial or spiritual realm. So you see, the real enemy isn't some other army. It's the illusions we get caught up in inside our own minds. So, if the main goal is to free the soul, we've got to first understand what the soul is. And that brings us to part 2, the soul, your true self. This, right here, is the absolute bedrock of the entire philosophy. Before you can even take one step on the path, you have to realize who, or more like what, you truly are. So here's the number one thing to get, the most important realization of all. You are not your body. Your true essential self is the invisible soul that's just living inside your physical form for a little while. Think of your body as a temporary vessel, but your soul is eternal. I mean, check this out. This visual just lays it out so perfectly. On the one hand, you've got the physical body. It's temporary, it's where all our worldly cravings and frustrations come from, and it basically anchors us to earth. But on the other hand, you have the soul. That's the real you. It's eternal, and it belongs to a whole other realm. Really, truly getting this difference? Well, it changes everything. And once you start thinking that way, it leads to the kind of incredible courage you see in this quote. When you truly identify with your eternal soul, the fear of physical death just loses its grip on you. Now, this isn't about wanting to die, not at all. It's about being unafraid to sacrifice the temporary vessel for something that lasts forever, like a greater purpose or a fundamental truth. This brings us to a really cool and fascinating paradox that's right at the heart of this warrior mindset. How can you possibly be completely selfless, but at the same time have this massive drive to achieve great things in the world? Let's unpack that. The secret is you have to hold two ideas in your head that seem to totally contradict each other. On a personal level, for yourself, you have to be selfless. But for the world, you need to have a huge, great ambition. So let's break down these two key concepts, muga, which is selflessness, and taioku, or great ambition. First up, we've got muga, which you could translate as no self. But really, think of it as being free from the tyranny of your own ego. It's about letting go of that little voice in your head that's always asking, so what's in it for me? It means releasing that greed for more stuff, that craving for other people's approval, and even that deep, primal fear of just preserving yourself. It's about detaching from that small, anxious I that's so tied to the physical body. But, and this is the paradox, that selflessness doesn't mean you just sit back and do nothing. No way! It's actually paired with taioku, or great ambition. Now, don't get this twisted. This is not personal greed. This is a powerful, impersonal drive to make a huge impact, to achieve incredible things for a cause that's way bigger than you are. It's about fulfilling your life's purpose for the good of the world. So if you've got this mindset of selfless ambition, what does it actually mean to fight? Well, the most famous symbol of the warrior is the sword. But in this philosophy, its purpose is almost entirely spiritual. Let's get into it.
A warrior on this spiritual path never ever fights for personal reasons. Not for money, not for fame, not for revenge. The only reason to fight is for what these teachings call God's justice, or true justice. It's about fighting to fix what's wrong, to defend what's right, and to help restore a kind of divine order to the world. And this is such a critical point. It completely reframes the whole idea of the sword. In this philosophy, the sword is not a tool for killing people. Its real purpose is something much, much higher. Here we go. This shows its higher purpose perfectly. The sword is a sacred instrument used to cut things on a spiritual level. It's used to sever your own worldly desires, your attachments, your obsessions, all the illusions, which are sometimes called demons or ma, that cloud your mind and trap your soul. It's a weapon of liberation.
And that brings us to this really profound quote. You are alive, but you are also dead. So what on earth does that mean? Well, it means the sword helps you die to your false self, to your ego, to your attachments, to all the illusions. And by dying to that world of illusion, you become truly alive in the spiritual sense, fully connected to your eternal soul.
Okay, I know these are some pretty big, high-minded ideas, but how do you actually live like this? How do you practice this spiritual way of being in your day-to-day life? Well, part 5 breaks it all down into 2 core principles you can use every single day. The 2 practices that really ground this whole philosophy are banji tette, which basically means being incredibly thorough in ordinary, everyday things, and ichigo ichie, which is about treating every single moment like a unique, once-in-a-lifetime encounter. So let's start with banji tette. This principle teaches that spiritual strength isn't found in some big, dramatic gesture. It's forged in the small stuff. It's about the relentless, dedicated perfection of totally mundane tasks. How you make your coffee, how you answer an email, how you clean your house. Doing these simple, ordinary things with absolute focus and dedication, that is what builds the soul of a warrior. And then you combine that daily discipline with the mindset of ichigo ichi. This is the deep, profound understanding that every moment, every interaction is a once-in-a-lifetime event. It will never happen again. You live each day as if it's the final, decisive battle. Because, hey, it just might be your last. It forces you to ask that incredibly powerful question every single day. If my life ended right now, would I be satisfied with how I live today? That's the spirit. So to wrap it all up, this vision of Bushido is a spiritual path. It's a roadmap for living a strong, pure, and courageous life that's dedicated to a purpose far beyond yourself. And all of it is guided by that one fundamental truth, that you are a soul, and your real home isn't even in this world. And that really leaves us with one final question to think about. In our modern world, which is just filled with endless distractions pulling us toward the temporary and the physical, how do you live a life that is truly for your soul? Something to ponder. Thanks so much for joining me.
What if I told you Japan's origin story didn't begin on a heavenly bridge, but with a giant from the Andromeda Galaxy? Yeah, today we're diving into the teachings of happy science, which describe a creator god named Ame-no-Mioya-Gami. And this being's story supposedly goes back a mind-boggling 30,000 years, long before any of the official chronicles we know.
So we're going to go from cosmic beginnings all the way to a modern-day mission. This is our roadmap for getting to know this really enigmatic deity.
So, let me ask you this. When you think about Japan's creation myths, who comes to mind? Probably some of the famous names from the Kojiki, right? Well, what if that wasn't the real beginning? What if the story started way, way earlier?
According to the sources we're looking at, before that well-known pantheon of gods ever came into the picture, there was another, original creator god for Japan. And it's a story that, for the most part, has been lost to mainstream history.
And this being has a name, Ame-no-Mioya-Gami. The claim, which is said to be documented in this ancient text called the Hatsuma Tsutai, is that this god was there at the absolute dawn of Japan.
And this is where the story takes a hard turn from ancient history into something a lot more like a cosmic epic. We've got to go back 30,000 years to one single event that supposedly changed absolutely everything. 30,000 years. Just let that sink in for a second. We're not just talking about the start of a new civilization here. The sources describe this as the beginning of a completely new era for the entire planet.
You see, according to the story, Ame-no-Mioya-Gami didn't just, emerge from the heavens, metaphorically. Nope. This being arrived from the Andromeda Galaxy
in a massive battleship-class spacecraft. And where did this cosmic vessel land? Of all places, at the foot of Mount Fuji. Specifically, near a smaller peak right next to it, it really grounds this incredible cosmic story in one of Japan's most sacred and recognizable places.
So you're probably wondering, what did this powerful visitor from another galaxy actually look like? Well, let me tell you, the descriptions are definitely not human. Okay, get ready for this. The texts paint this incredible picture of a being that stood 25 meters tall. That's over 80 feet. It had a golden body that was described as being like a diamond, completely impenetrable and stronger than any weapon on Earth.
So we're not talking about some vague, abstract spirit here. The teachings describe a real, physical being of incredible power, a literal giant made of light who walked the Earth.
But this being didn't just land and look impressive. No. Ame-no-Mioya-Gami is credited with laying down the actual foundations of Japanese civilization and culture as we know it.
These teachings say that so many key parts of Japanese culture came directly from this one god. We're talking about monozukuri, that incredible spirit of dedicated craftsmanship. The way of the sword, which is seen as the origin of Bushido principles. Even sumo wrestling, which wasn't just a sport but a divine ritual. And the intricate courtesies and etiquette that are so fundamental to Japanese life. All of it.
Now you'd think shaping an entire nation's culture would be enough, right? Well, the story doesn't stop there. According to these teachings, Ame-no-Mioya-Gami's influence went truly global.
Just take a look at this map. It shows the incredible reach they're talking about. The idea is that these teachings and cultural ideas spread out from Japan and went on to influence ancient civilizations in China, India, Egypt, and even all the way over in the Americas.
And they even connect the dots to other major mythologies. For example, the sources suggest that the creator god from Chinese mythology, Pangu, is actually just another name for Ame-no-Mioya-Gami, two different cultures interpreting the exact same original being.
Okay, so that brings us to the final and maybe most important part. How does this ancient story connect to us today? Why is it considered not just history, but a vital message for the modern world?
At the heart of it all, the whole point of reviving this belief is to bring back what the sources call a lost moral compass. It's about restoring a very clear line between good and evil, and reminding all of us about our divine origins as children of a creator.
So here's the bottom line. The teaching argues that our modern world has kind of lost its way, that we judge things based on profit or convenience instead of what's truly right. The mission, then, is to return to a divine standard, the will of the Creator, as the ultimate measure for everything.
And that leaves us with this final thought. I mean, a story about an 80-foot-tall, diamond-bodied god from another galaxy is pretty powerful stuff. It really makes you think, how does changing a nation's most ancient story, from earthly gods to cosmic beings, end up shaping its vision for the future? Today, we're going to explore a really fascinating take from our source material on the original spiritual teachings of Japan, teachings that it claims have been almost completely forgotten. This is a story that goes way back, long before the Shinto that many people are familiar with today. So let's jump right in.
So think about Japanese tradition for a second. You know, concepts like harmony, all those iconic rituals, even something like sumo wrestling. Our source material asks a really provocative question. Do we actually know what they originally meant? The suggestion here is that what we see on the surface today might just be a shadow of a much, much deeper spiritual truth.
And that really gets to the heart of what we're talking about today. The core idea is that Japan's original spiritual bedrock has been lost, or at least buried over the centuries. We're going to unpack what that original foundation actually was, according to our source.
Okay, so here's the bombshell. The central argument from our source is that contrary to the popular image of a pantheon with thousands of gods, Japan's most ancient faith was actually built around one supreme being, a single, universal creator god who represented the entire cosmos. Now that's a pretty radical departure from how most people think about Shinto.
All right, so if the original faith was all about a single creator, what did that actually look like for people on the ground? What were the rules of the game? Let's take a look at how this one core belief shaped an entire worldview.
And this creator god has a name, Ame-no-Mioya-Gami. According to the source, this wasn't some distant, abstract deity. No, this god provided humanity with a really clear blueprint for how to live a good and righteous life, right here on Earth. Everything we're about to talk about flowed from this one divine source.
And here's that blueprint. It wasn't just some vague philosophy. It was a super practical guide for life. It starts with the basics like etiquette, bowing, showing respect for your elders. Then it gets cosmic, explaining that heaven is the realm of the gods, but Earth is our job. It's humanity's place to perfect, to turn into a paradise. The teachings covered social harmony, life's big rituals like birth and marriage, and at its very core were these three pillars: having a heart of respect, the will to believe, and the drive to always learn. You see, it was a complete system for how to live.
So, if these original teachings were so comprehensive, what happened to them? Well, this next section from our source gets into how that original faith started to change, leading to what it calls a hollowed-out version of Shinto today.
This slide shows you the big shift. According to the source, the belief system went from this grand, universal faith in one creator to a much narrower focus on smaller, local, ethnic gods. And the argument is that in that process, the profound spiritual vision of the original teachings just got lost.
This quote from the source material really hits hard. The idea here is that modern Shinto has become a kind of shell of its former self. You know, the external things, the rituals, the manners, they've survived. But the deep spiritual teachings that gave them meaning in the first place, they're gone.
And according to the source, this has real consequences. When you lose the core teachings, faith can become shallow. People might lose sight of the bigger picture, of their soul's long journey, and instead just focus on getting quick benefits in this life. It can create this impatience, a desire for quick fixes, because that larger cosmic purpose has been forgotten.
But the source says it's not all lost, and this is where it gets really compelling. It argues we can actually rediscover that original spirit by taking a closer look at things we think we know, like the Japanese idea of harmony or wa, and even the sport of sumo.
I mean, ask anyone about the Japanese spirit of wa, and they'll probably tell you it's about harmony, right? Avoiding conflict, keeping things smooth, not rocking the boat. But according to our source, that's a huge misunderstanding of what it was meant to be.
The true meaning, as our source presents it, is actually incredibly active. It's not about passively accepting things. True Wa demands that you clearly distinguish good from evil, and then you have to actively defeat evil to establish real justice. It's about restoring a pure, righteous state, not just keeping things quiet.
And let's take sumo. We see it as Japan's national sport, this amazing contest of strength and skill. But its roots, according to this material, aren't in sport at all. They're in sacred ritual. This is a pretty wild reinterpretation. The sumo ring itself is seen as a kikgai, a sacred barrier. And in this view, the original point of the match was a kind of exorcism, a ritual to literally drive evil spirits out of that holy space. It was also spiritual training, a way to build a warrior's spirit strong enough to protect the divine.
And this theme of a deeper meaning applies to social harmony too. This source redefines something like manliness, saying it's not about personal gain, but about a selfless duty to protect and give life to others, to live with total integrity for the good of everyone.
So when you put all these pieces together, how do you actually live by these rediscovered principles? Well, the final section of our source material calls for a complete shift in how we view life itself.
The key here is perspective. The source teaches that our life here on Earth is incredibly short, just temporary. It's a training ground. Our true, eternal home is in the spiritual world. And if you adopt that view, it argues, it changes everything about how you live in the here and now.
And there's a roadmap for this called Ten-Chi-Jin, or Heaven, Earth, Man. It's pretty straightforward. First, know heaven. Understand the divine plan. Second, know man. Understand yourself and society. And third, you take that knowledge and you work to make the earth prosper, to help create a paradise here that's worthy of the divine. And so that leaves us with this final, powerful question to think about. And it applies to any tradition, really. Are we just following the external forms, just going through the motions? Or are we actually connecting with the living spirit, the original meaning that brought those traditions to life in the first place?
All right, welcome. Today, we're diving into something really fascinating, the teachings of Ame-no-Mioya-Gami. This is a spiritual philosophy that's going to make you rethink, well, pretty much everything you know about economics, wealth, and what it really means to be a leader.
So let's just jump right in with a huge question, one that really gets at the heart of our assumptions about money. Can you actually take this world's wealth with you to the next life? Well, according to this philosophy, the answer is probably not what you're thinking.
So first up, let's talk about economics beyond this world. A place where the cash in your wallet has absolutely no value.
The core idea here is that our material economy, the one we live and breathe every day, is just one piece of a much, much bigger puzzle. The source material tells us that in the spiritual realm, which it calls the real world, our rules of economics just don't apply. Money as we know it, it's completely useless there.
So what do they use instead? Well, this philosophy introduces something called the economics of gratitude. In this system, real value, true wealth, isn't something you can store in a bank. It's measured by the gratitude you receive from others through your selfless actions.
And this is where it gets really interesting. Look at this direct comparison. Our earthly economy is often driven by self-interest and profit, right? But in the spiritual economy, that whole idea is flipped on its head. The focus is entirely on altruism, on helping others. And success? It's measured by the richness of your heart. And this has some massive implications. According to the source, how you act economically, right here, directly decides where you end up in the afterlife. It's not about how much money you made. The real questions are, what was your motivation? What was the process like? And crucially, how did you give that wealth back to the world?
That brings us right to our next section, the source of true wealth. We're going to look at how you can unlock real value through three key principles: truth, goodness, and beauty.
So, if our actions on Earth matter that much, how do you actually create the right kind of wealth? The teaching is very clear on this. It says legitimate wealth can't just be useful, it has to be infused with these three core pillars.
The first pillar is truth. Pretty straightforward, right? This just means that any wealth you generate has to be completely free of deception. It has to be built on a foundation of pure honesty and sincerity.
The second pillar is goodness. This is all about making a positive impact. The work you do and the wealth that comes from it has to serve a purpose beyond just making money. It has to protect people, serve them, and genuinely improve their lives.
And finally, the third component is beauty. And we're not just talking about things looking pretty. This is about functional beauty, elegant service, and a kind of deep craftsmanship and thoughtful design that elevates something from being merely useful to being truly exceptional.
Okay, so let's zoom out a bit. We've talked about the individual. Now let's look at the big picture. In Section 3, a society guided by the middle way.
The social philosophy that guides all of this is called the middle way. The core idea is actually pretty simple. A good, healthy society is one that fairly rewards people who work hard and diligently. It's this balance that keeps everyone motivated to chip in and do their part.
And this principle is fueled by something the source calls the law of Enji, which is basically a virtuous cycle. It all starts with individual motivation and effort. That effort leads to creative work and new ideas. That work then gets its just reward, which brings prosperity. And here's the kicker. That prosperity inspires even more creation and effort. It's like a self-sustaining engine for societal progress.
Now this leads to a pretty provocative point from the source material. It cautions against what it specifically calls a godless democracy. The argument here is that if a system focuses only on redistributing wealth to create inequality of outcome instead of inequality of opportunity, it risks breaking that virtuous cycle. Why? Because it kills the spirit of diligence. It removes the incentive to strive.
And that brings us perfectly to the final piece of the puzzle. Section 4, the mission of virtuous leaders.
So what's the engine that actually drives this ideal society forward? Well, according to these teachings, it's virtue. But this isn't some passive moral high ground. It's defined as an active wisdom, something that's forged through tough self-discipline and real training.
So, leaders who have this virtue, they have a dual mission. Their job isn't just to manage the economy and bring prosperity to the nation. No, they also have this really heavy responsibility to morally and ethically guide the people in the right direction.
And the source even provides a practical framework for this. It says leaders are meant to develop this virtue by actively practicing what are called the 4 righteous paths. Things like love, wisdom, self-reflection, and progress.
Which leaves us all with one final question to think about. If gratitude were the only real currency, how rich would you be? How would you even measure your own wealth? Something to ponder. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.
All right, welcome to This Explainer.
Today, we are unpacking a highly complex, seriously multi-layered source text from the Happy Science teachings. Now, what makes this material so incredibly unique is its sheer scope. I mean, we're going to track a philosophical journey that starts at the absolute micro level, like how a government should treat a single human soul, and it scales all the way up to literal intergalactic theology. It is a massive, sweeping narrative, and I'm really excited to guide you through the structure of these ideas today. So let's dive in. Here is our roadmap for the explainer. We'll start with number 1, the foundations of a nation, then move into redefining true patriotism, expand out to establishing Earth utopia, and finally wrap things up with the cosmic space age. Okay, section 1, foundations of a nation, the individual and the state. The text begins its philosophy right at the most grounded level, looking at the relationship between a single human soul and the governing state. Now, to really grasp this relationship, we first have to understand the core anchor of the text. The absolutely crucial point here is this concept, Ame-no-Mioya-Gami. According to the source material, this is the supreme creator deity, the ultimate cosmic parent, essentially. And the text argues that any valid political system on Earth cannot just be some secular arrangement of laws. It absolutely must be rooted in faith toward this creator. If a government doesn't recognize a higher spiritual authority, well, the text claims it's already completely off track. The source draws a really stark contrast when it comes to human governance. On one side, you have what the text calls democracy under God. In this kind of system, the state exists for one primary reason, and that's to serve the individual's spiritual growth and earthly happiness. Leaders are literally defined as servants to the people. But then, on the flip side, we see totalitarianism, which the text heavily critiques. In a totalitarian state, that whole dynamic is completely inverted. The citizens basically become fuel for the machine. You know, their rights are restricted, and they're sacrificed just for the survival of the state itself. And the reason this matters to us is that the text is explicitly warning that without a spiritual compass, democracies can easily slide right into totalitarianism, consuming the very people they are meant to protect. Moving on to Section 2, Redefining True Patriotism, a Critique of Nationalism. So, now that we understand the individual's relationship to the state, the text zooms out a bit to the macro scale of the nation itself. Interestingly, the source material directly critiques traditional Japanese nationalism, specifically traditional restorationist Shintoism. The text actually warns that looking backward to a purely ethnic, ancient religion risks fostering a really dangerous sense of ethnic superiority, basically the idea of Japan as the center of the world. The source even goes so far as to draw direct philosophical parallels between this kind of ethnic nationalism and how figures like Hitler utilized Germanic paganism, and it references the philosopher Heidegger in the process to make its point. The core argument here is that a purely ethnic religion just lacks the universal criteria needed to objectively judge global good and evil. It ultimately just leads to isolationism and fundamentally selfish national interests. So you might be wondering, if traditional nationalism is flawed, what exactly is the alternative? Well, the text offers a concept called Yamato Gokoro, which it redefines as true patriotism, and this is a massive paradigm shift. True patriotism, according to these teachings, is not defined by borders or exclusion or geopolitical dominance, not at all. Instead, it's framed as a spiritual responsibility. It's about polishing one's own soul and contributing to the global public good, all stemming from a really profound gratitude to that ultimate creator we mentioned earlier. So it transforms patriotism from a political weapon into the spiritual duty of service. All right, leaving the nation-state behind, the text zooms out even further to the entire globe. Section 3, Establishing Earth Utopia, Beyond Borders. Obviously, to govern a globe, you need a global system. And the source text makes a really bold claim here. It states, and I quote, "The judgment of good and evil on a global level must transcend international organizations. There must be God's heart, or Buddha's intention." Essentially, the text is arguing that secular bodies, think the United Nations or the G20, are fundamentally insufficient for establishing true global justice. Because they operate on majorities and political compromises, they lack that divine perspective required to actually delineate right from wrong on a planetary scale. The ultimate earthly goal outlined in these teachings is the realization of what they call Earth utopia. And this isn't just about ending wars. It's a highly specific global society where individual spiritual awakening is perfectly harmonized with universal peace and mutual prosperity. The foundational logic here is that international conflicts just cannot be solved purely by treaties or economics. They can only be permanently resolved when humanity adopts the correct, unified spiritual mindset. And finally, we reach the most expansive section of our explainer. Section 4, the cosmic space age, our galactic roots. We've scaled from the individual to the nation to the Earth, and now we look to the stars. 2.3 million. That is the distance in light years from Earth to the Andromeda Galaxy. And according to the source material, this number is incredibly significant. The text claims that Andromeda is the true ancient origin point of Earth's creator deity, Ame-no-Mioya-Gami. So the teachings are proposing that humanity's spiritual roots aren't just ancient, they are fundamentally extraterrestrial. And the text doesn't just treat this as some distant, abstract metaphor. It presents this concept as a tangible, ongoing reality. The source material actually includes photographs, which it claims show Andromeda UFO fleets operating right now. The teachings explicitly connect our earthly salvation and the establishment of that Earth utopia we just talked about to literal intergalactic intervention. Let's actually look closely at the sheer scale of the world building within this text, because the details provided are highly, highly specific. The source describes an active Andromeda fleet protecting Earth right now. We're talking 200-meter-long motherships led by specific commanders, like someone named Commander Z. It outlines 35-meter support crafts whose specific mission is to eliminate negative interfering alien influences coming from other star systems. It even describes 10-meter patrol discs circling Tokyo at speeds of Mach 10, operated by a mix of humanoid extraterrestrials and androids. It is a remarkably detailed cosmic hierarchy that the text insists is directly overseeing our geopolitical and spiritual evolution. Which brings us to our final thought for today. We started with the very basic question of how a democracy should treat a single citizen, and we've ended up with intergalactic fleets battling for the spiritual soul of Earth. But the core theme remains exactly the same throughout the entire text. Governance requires a moral, spiritual anchor. So the question this material ultimately leaves us with is this. As humanity continues to evolve, as we eventually look past our own borders and out toward the stars, what will be the moral compass that guides us? What will ultimately define our cosmic justice? It's a really profound concept to wrap your head around, regardless of your own beliefs. Thank you so much for joining me today. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer. Welcome to today's explainer. We are jumping straight into unpacking a truly fascinating document, a unique spiritual text that literally bridges earthly political critiques with a grand cosmic history. Let's dive right in, because understanding how belief systems build these massive, cohesive worldviews really helps us spot the hidden frameworks behind the media and politics we consume every single day. The journey we're about to take, it starts with the basics of human governance and takes us all the way into the stars. Right off the bat, our source material today is a study guide titled Learning the Whole Picture of Ame-no-Mioya-Gami. We're going to impartially analyze these unique religious and philosophical teachings. And honestly, what makes this text so compelling to explore is just how meticulously it constructs its worldview. It weaves together ancient history, modern global politics, and yes, extraterrestrial intervention into one completely cohesive narrative framework. To make sense of this massive scope, here is our game plan for today. We've got 5 clear steps. First, the creator's vision. Then, the pitfalls of nationalism. After that, we'll look at redefining true patriotism, move on to building an Earth utopia, and finally, blast off into the coming space age. All right, section 1, the creator's vision, setting the spiritual stage. Okay, so to understand the arguments made later in the document, we absolutely have to establish its theological premise first. The text introduces a central deity, Ame-no-Mioya-Gami. According to the source, this creator god descended to Earth from the Andromeda Galaxy roughly 30,000 years ago to establish the foundation of faith on our planet. What's really interesting here is the scale. It's both ancient and galactic. The text uses this sweeping timeline to suggest that human history is just one small part of a much larger, carefully guided cosmic project. Moving right along to section 2, the pitfalls of nationalism, which sets up the core problem. Now, having established this grand theological stage, the source document pivots sharply to critique modern human governance. And it draws a very sharp, uncompromising line between 2 forms of government. On one side, it defines totalitarianism as a godless system where the people exist merely to serve and ultimately be sacrificed for the state. On the flip side, it advocates for what it calls a God-centered democracy. In this model, the state is completely subservient to the people. It exists purely to maximize their happiness and spiritual growth. The argument here is that without a spiritual anchor, nations naturally just slide toward totalitarianism. You might be wondering, how does this framework apply to actual historical conflicts? Well, the text makes a remarkably bold assertion regarding World War II. It states, "The defeat in the Great War was not Japan's defeat, but the defeat of Japanese Shinto." The argument the source makes is that Japan lost because its traditional ethnic religion lacked universal criteria for good and evil. Essentially, it posits that an isolated nation-centric faith just couldn't serve as a foundation for a modern global world. And it doesn't stop there. The text applies this exact same critique to other nations. It connects leaders like Hitler to ancient, localized earth gods or Germanic tribal religions. It strongly warns that when a country falls into restorationism, meaning looking backward to isolated ethnic myths, it loses its global vision and inevitably causes conflict. This brilliantly illustrates the document's core political warning. Nationalism without a universal moral compass leads straight to ruin. So that brings us to Section 3, redefining true patriotism. Let's look at the solution. If isolated nationalism is the big problem, how exactly do we fix it? The text outlines a concept called Yamato Gokoro. According to the study guide's instructors, this is an inclusive form of patriotism. It's defined not by aggressively asserting superiority over other nations, but by loving your country through a broader faith in a universal creator. It involves expressing gratitude to ancestors and refining your own soul to improve society as a whole. So it's really about inward-looking spiritual growth rather than outward-looking political aggression. But this spiritual growth isn't just internal, it's meant to shape the real world. The study guide introduces a socio-economic philosophy summed up in the phrase, self-profit equals public profit. The core idea here is that pursuing personal, spiritual, and material happiness has to naturally harmonize with the betterment of society. It advocates for a middle path. It rejects hyper-individualism where people only care for themselves, but it also rejects extreme collectivism where the individual is just erased.
Okay, moving to Section 4, Building an Earth Utopia. The Global Vision.
Scaling way up from individual and national politics, this philosophy is then applied to the entire planet. The document impartially lays out a major critique of our current global institutions. It argues that earthly survival is literally impossible without a universal standard of what it calls God's justice. For instance, it points out that international bodies like the UN are ultimately flawed because they rely on simple majority rule or the consensus of powerful nations instead of an objective, universal moral compass. The text argues that without that higher standard, we're just voting on what's convenient, not what's actually right.
So, here's the million-dollar question. How does this earthly struggle for a global moral compass connect to the Andromeda Galaxy? I know, it sounds like a massive leap, right? But this is exactly where the source material takes us next. Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, the coming space age, and some serious cosmic escalation. This is where earthly politics completely gives way to cosmic events. According to the document, Earth is currently facing a final crisis. We are at a massive tipping point in our civilization, and because of this, the text claims we are receiving direct cosmic intervention from the Andromeda Galaxy. To put that into perspective, that is 2.5 million light-years away. The text actually refers to this galaxy as the location of Earth's mother star. Now, the text doesn't just deal in vague metaphors here. It gets incredibly specific. It details a literal extraterrestrial fleet sent by the creator God. We are talking about a 200-meter universe battleship named Mikasa, 35-meter support craft that are specifically tasked with repelling malevolent aliens, and security patrol craft cruising over Earth at Mach 10. And, to add one more wild detail to the mix, the text specifies these craft are piloted by female androids and other cosmic beings. The sheer level of detail presented here is clearly intended to underscore the reality and the immediacy of this cosmic protection. And this brings us to the ultimate thematic tie-in of the entire text. It states, "The Lord's mission is to teach good and evil in the universe and cosmic justice." Remember that God's justice we talked about earlier for earthly democracies? Well, the text asserts that human democracy and our basic concepts of right and wrong have to rapidly evolve because we are stepping onto a much, much larger stage. Basically, our definitions of justice are about to become galactic. Which leaves us with this final, truly provocative thought derived from the text. Is humanity actually ready to expand its definition of justice to a cosmic scale? Think about it. We've traveled from the critique of 20th century nationalism all the way to 200-meter spaceships from Andromeda. It's a profound reminder of how deeply integrated political philosophy and spiritual cosmology can be in texts like this. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. I hope this structured look helped you grasp the full, sweeping picture of this fascinating source material.